Well, welcome everyone. My name is Marc-Andre Pigeon. I'm the director for the Canadian Centre for Study Co-operatives, and it's my great pleasure to be here today with Elvy Del Bianco from Vancity. Elvy, I'll get you to tell us a bit more about yourself before we jump into some of the conversation.
Hi, Marc-Andre. My title at Vancity is Cooperative Portfolio Manager, which is not a particularly descriptive title. I manage a lot of the relationships that we have with co-ops, especially new co-ops. So I'm generally the first contact person for somebody who's wanting to start a co-op, and I try and get resources into their hands to help them achieve that. So that might be some technical advice, referrals, investment of resources, and to get them access to financing that the credit union makes available to all businesses. I do also quite a bit of education around this subject, both inside the organization with my colleagues to ensure that they've got the knowledge about co-ops that they need in order to be able to do their work, and also out in community and in partnership with the British Columbia Cooperative Association. In particular, we run a co-op boot camp twice a year to make sure that people can get their their cooperative business idea up and off the ground as quickly and as effectively as possible.
Great, thank you. So one of the things that kind of stands out if you look at the history of cooperatives is just this kind of idea that a lot of times they emerge after, during, somewhere around a crisis. Are you seeing any signs of that in your own engagement with the cooperative sector? Any signs that there might be new ideas coming to the fore, people starting to rethink the way they might have otherwise done things?
I totally believe that that is true. I think when the going gets tough, the tough form co-ops, and if we look at Canadian history and the history of other jurisdictions, we'll see that whenever there is a social or economic crisis, we'll see new co-op development. I was seeing this, I've been in my role for 7.5 years now, and the interest in this business model has gone up steadily in that time, and in the last couple of years, very dramatically. And I think that was reflecting all kinds of issues that we had prior to the crisis. Income inequality, lack of opportunity to get access to good, meaningful, well-paying work, responses to the push into the gig economy. There's been a whole lot of interest in this model, and since the crisis, although we've all been in kind of putting out fire mode here, right? Trying to address things. But there have been issues that are opportunities that have come up. I've been working with a group in Chinatown here in Vancouver on a project to get groceries delivered to seniors. Now, this is an immediate response to the crisis because seniors obviously are trying to stay away from grocery stores. But we see the legacy coming out of this is a food delivery system for Chinatown that would be run on a cooperative basis. Kind of a cooperative Foodora or Uber Eats or something like this, because those businesses don't use those services. So we see that as an opportunity that we can help create. And I'm just waiting to hear from a group that is directly involved in responding to the COVID crisis, and they're looking to incorporate to get supplies out onto the market. They're looking to incorporate as a cooperative. So there are some definite ideas out there that I think the challenge is trying to sift them out against all the background noise that we're currently experiencing and all the pain that people are experiencing.
So it's interesting you mentioned this delivery service. I was reading just the other day in the Globe Mail, there was kind of there's been a bit of a campaign, Order from Home Day, I think it's called, or something to that effect. And in the story, they were talking about how a lot of the merchants, the restaurants who do home delivery, feel a little bit hard done by the Uber Eats and the Skip the Dishes and those kind of services. And there was this kind of fleeting mention of the opportunity to create a cooperative that would serve those businesses. So do you see any potential for this idea that you're kind of maybe nurturing with serving seniors, kind of taking some wings and expanding more largely?
I think so. We're doing this, we're supporting the incubation of a business right now that is going to take on Uber and Lyft in terms of ride hailing, which has only recently been allowed in British Columbia. And this is an extension of the same idea. If we eliminate the profit margin from this exercise, we put more money into the pockets of the people actually providing the service, and make it more reasonable, potentially more reasonable for other users. So I think we'll see how it goes in Chinatown. We'll see how it goes, and given the challenges that we have right now to try and get these things off the ground. You know, but when we go back to normal, whatever that looks like, I think there is a real opportunity here, and if we can support the creation of that in Vancouver, I'm sure we can either share that or support its expansion out to other communities.
So I'm not sure how much you can speak to this, but I'll ask the question anyway. But how is Vancity in general addressing its members? And maybe you can talk, you know, through this crisis and helping them. And maybe you can talk a bit about your own particular lens on that. But just in general, do you have a sense of what Vancity is doing for its members?
Absolutely. After when we started experiencing the shutdown or the lockdown, the first thing the organization did was reach out to our membership. We're tasked with doing that, and I took on co-ops obviously, but we have people looking at reaching out to our small business members, not-for-profits and others, just to get a sense of where they're at and what were the pain points. Certainly the things that came back, there's cash crunches for everybody. Cash flow has disappeared, but fixed costs are still there. So there was a demand for increases in lines of credit, for deferrals of payments, either of principal or interest or both. And in some cases, because, and some of we really learned to appreciate how nuanced some of these things are, because people's personal lives are often wrapped up in terms of their work lives, especially if they're gig workers or solopreneurs. And so not being able to, generate cash flow means you're not be able to pay your mortgage, right? So we're seeing the need for deferments on those kinds of things. And we've done that. We've offered deferrals for things like mortgage payments. And we've done it in a way that we're not compounding interest, which is what some other financial institutions are doing, right? You're deferring, but then you're going to end up paying interest on the interest. We're not doing anything like that. We've cut our credit card interest rates to 0 for people who are adversely affected by COVID-19. We've waived fees such as Interact e-transfer fees and ATM fees until September 30th. We're doing all kinds of things to try and to alleviate some of the pressures on our membership.
So it's quite remarkable, Elvy, because you read the papers. Again, it's my main source of information, and there's a lot of touting of the banks deferring, but then there have been this kind of subtext story, this other story that's kind of in parallel with that, about how at the end of this, some people are going to be really far behind. They're going to feel the weight of that deferral. Whereas Vancity is kind of waiving, at least in some cases, that. What do you think? Why did that decision? How come that decision gets made at Vancity and not at the bank? Is it the cooperative structure that's kind of driving that a little bit, or is there something else? Or what are your thoughts on that?
For us, I think fundamentally it's the cooperative structure. I mean, we have a long history of being responsive to our members' needs. And we're recognizing that we're all in this together. If our members start going down, I mean, that's not going to affect us in any kind of positive way. So we all need to be supporting each other during this crisis, and that's what our members were telling us that they needed. And so I don't want to say what some of the financial institutions are doing are window dressing, but I mean, cutting interest rates a little bit on credit cards is fine, but I mean, we really need to make some kind of fundamental support there to really help people through these kinds of challenges, right? I mean, these things hurt, but we can spread that kind of hurt around a little bit so that we're all better off.
So one of the things I would imagine is a challenge is, again, for people like me who are on the outside, don't live in Vancouver, so I'm not a Vancity member. How do somebody become aware of what you're doing? I mean, there's something so very positive, obviously, about what you're doing, but you kind of ideally would want that to get out. But the conversation is so dominated oftentimes by the banks. Do you have any sense of how to kind of make that known, in a sense, the things you're doing?
Now we're talking about marketing and those kinds of things, which I'm not my field of expertise by any chance. I mean, we've been focusing on our members and letting them know. And we do have a resource page available on at our website, www.vancity.com, and there's all those kinds of, there's updates on COVID happening there regularly. My own hearing from the media is, I was listening to CBC the other day, and there was a mention there of the credit union movement going to 0% on credit cards. Well, I'm not sure that was the movement. It was definitely Vancity. So I don't know how much of that nuance is being picked up out there, but you know, it would be nice if it was. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think this is one of those things where when I was in the credit union system, we always used to say this is the best kept secret. Well, here's an opportunity to not have a secret, but the problem is finding somebody who will listen and share the news. You know, that's always a bit of a challenge.
Well, you know, I know you can appreciate, Marc-Andre, that you know, the subtleties that, you know, it's a subtle difference between a chartered bank and a credit union, and unfortunately, you know, the average consumer doesn't necessarily appreciate all those kinds of things. Yeah. If you're a Vancity member today, you are definitely doing better. You are definitely doing better as a result of that kind of change. And I think that is at least on the ground in real time every day. I think people are getting an education in terms of the fundamental difference between those kinds of structures.
Well, that's just it. I mean, I think we talked about this in some of our material. You walk into a co-op gas station or a Vancity branch. You know, superficially, you might not see a lot of difference, although in some cases you may, but generally it's very similar to what you might see at a competitor, but it's the behavior and the response afterwards that makes a difference. So you've been out calling your members. What have you been hearing from your co-op members? What are they kind of going through, and how is Vancity offering support to them?
Well, there's been a range of responses to the ones that I've called. Some are in trouble. Some are, everybody's affected for sure. Some are feeling definitely pinches in terms of cash flow. A number of others I was actually kind of surprised at the number that were telling me they were doing okay. In part because of some of the relief that the federal government has brought in, for sure. Also because, you know, they're using this time to do some work that they've been wanting to do for a while. They have enough work currently going on, and they're able to prioritize amongst their members who should be getting the bulk of that work, because some people have more needs than others. And some actually have been doing really well, and in fact are looking to hire people because they see some opportunities in this crisis if they focus in on essential services. So there's been a real kind of dramatic kind of range of impact there. I do get the impression that these groups being communities of interest with a good amount of trust in each other, that they are leaning in on each other in order to be able to get through this time, that they are able to make decisions on their to affect the will of the group, rather than on some other investor or external kind of interest. And so my general impression is that that is becoming a real asset during this time, right?
And I think that's partly what explains, I mean, some of the literature would suggest that's partly what explains the resilience of the model in difficult times, and even, you know, just getting off the ground, of course. So your work kind of really borders on, to some extent, co-op development and kind of, well, supporting that process anyway, for sure. Do you see any, if you had a magic wand to wave and out of this crisis, what could government do? Now I'm talking maybe more provincial government, but also federal, if you have thoughts there too. But what could they do to kind of give some additional life to this, perhaps this moment in time where there's an opportunity for the cooperative sector to take up more space and really kind of make a difference?
Yeah, that's a great question, Marc-Andre. I think what this crisis has shown is some real cracks in our social economy. You know, we've been living with a certain orientation towards globalization and towards wealth creation that is primarily supporting people at the top end of the income scale. And that lack of investment in terms of public infrastructure is really become apparent, right? and you know, because there is less wealth being captured out there and less wealth being reinvested. It's also, I think, showing some cracks in our kind of civic culture or social culture. And I don't think it's been real. I think the focus has really been on individualism and on, you know, everybody for themselves. And that is not serving us well during this particular time, right? Co-ops are communities of interest that are there to support each other through good and bad times. And I think there is a case to be made for focusing investment at that kind of level. So what could that look like? I mean, if we look at other jurisdictions, and the one I'm particularly familiar with is in Italy, in northern Italy, Emilia-Romagna in particular. The creation there of indivisible reserves to support at a preferential tax treatment, to allow co-ops to build up stores of capital to serve the interests of their cooperative for the indefinite future, is during a time of crisis like this, is a tremendous asset. And we've seen this as the co-ops in Italy came through the financial crisis. They leaned into those indivisible reserves in order to retool their operations, find new markets, transition people out and find new members, a younger cohort of members, and to come out of the crisis. You know, pools of capital located in community, democratically controlled by a group of people, sounds like exactly the kind of investments that we need to be making. So I think some kind of preferential treatment for co-ops that make those kinds of investments, because it does take capital out of their hands. It's not capital that can be distributed to members through dividend payments or anything else. So that needs to be, that kind of sacrifice, because it is a sacrifice, at least for the short term, needs to be kind of recognized and incentivized, I think that would be something that would be relatively, you know, that's a piece of low-hanging fruit that we should probably be reaching for.
That's a wonderful example. And it's also, what's remarkable about that area of Italy is Italy as a whole has had a pretty tough go of things since the crisis, right? They've never really come back, and yet that part of the country is done okay, you know. And so yeah, it's all the more remarkable. I mean, it would be remarkable if the country had done well, but the country as a whole has not done well. No. And yet it's still prospering. So there's something there that I think is worth exploring, and I hope to have an opportunity to do that. But yeah, this is another conversation. Elvy, is there anything else that you know, maybe just a little bit riff on that idea that when we come out of this, do you see any sense, or do you have a sense of how our broad culture might change and be more favorable to a cooperative mindset, or is it too hard to say? I mean, these are big questions, I know.
Yeah, it's I think things are definitely going to look different. I don't think there's going to be I don't think normal is going to be the same normal that we had before. Picking up on this idea that, you know, like the cracks and you know, the cracks in the stucco and the foundation have all been sort of like laid bare now. And I think individuals that have been trying to make a go of it on their own, I think, you know, are going to be, you know, facing some real precarity during this period and possibly afterwards. I think, and when they look, I think if they look at co-ops and look at the relative success that co-ops have had in terms of weathering these kinds of things, maybe will, you know, generate some ideas in terms of trying to reach out to others and to work kind of collectively on addressing these kinds of challenges. And I think there's all kinds of opportunities there for us to kind of explore, and these are the ones I'm kind of keeping my eye on. Gig workers, solopreneurs, however you want to classify these folks, but I mean, you know, is there an opportunity to sort of create structures that can serve their need for independence and autonomy, and yet create some kind of solidarity to help them kind of generate opportunities for themselves and share the difficulties. I helped support a couple of co-ops get off the ground recently that were doing just that, and my impression is that they're doing okay during this crisis. I mean, I think doing better than they would be doing if they were operating on their own. We may see some, you know, business failures, or people deciding, especially aging baby boomers, that, you know, maybe the it's into overtime in terms of getting out of the market, you know, could we turn those over to their employees and convert those into worker co-ops? We've been working on this kind of subject for a while now, but I think suddenly that might get accelerated, you know, and the interest in that might get accelerated. The importance of food during this crisis and food security and local food production has gone right to the very top. And there has been a reinvigorated interest in the cooperative model as it applies to agriculture, which is amongst its, you know, earliest kind of manifestations. I think if we really want to secure food systems by generating revenue for those individual farmers, this is the way to do it. So, you know, housing precarity talks to the need for more housing co-ops. I mean, I think the solution for all the challenges that we're seeing, at least part of the solution is leaning into this model and finding those collective solutions. I mean, there's just not going to be enough wealth out there for individuals to kind of make this work on their own.
So that's a really interesting point, because, you know, one thing that's kind of also become very clear, you mentioned the food security is obviously one of those things, but also the wide berth of people out there who have had a hard go of things for a long time, but we also depend on, right? Whether they work in the grocery store or they do deliveries or all those things, and maybe thinking about some, as you said, some sort of solidarity mechanism to help them at once keep their independence, but also give them some support. It does seem very promising. Now, Elvy, I'm going to wrap up and ask you if there's anything that I should have asked you or that you would like to add to this conversation, because I'm happy to hear it. Don't pretend to have all the good ideas here.
I certainly don't pretend to have all the good ideas. I'm curious what you think what the opportunities might be in this, Marc-Andre.
Yeah.
Like so tell me what I should be looking at now in terms of this crisis.
Yeah, well, I think we kind of danced around some of this. I think when we started the conversation around the food delivery, that one just jumped out at me right away. Like all these kind of platform opportunities. Another one that came to my attention recently is the newspaper industry. We talk about the media as a kind of important element of our democracy, and we know that newspapers are the kind of the origins of a lot of news coverage, and they're struggling, right? And they're probably going to struggle even more after this. So anyway, the idea that came to me was somebody who has a printing press in Alberta, and they had this idea that particularly these rural newspapers have reasonably viable markets, believe it or not, but they have these high costs of printing. And so what if they got together and bought a printing company together collectively? And so this person was thinking maybe this is a way of addressing that issue. So I think, like you say, there are a lot of opportunities out there that are suddenly seem to be popping into people's heads because of what's going on. So I see opportunity there. I see another example of where I think a more traditional one is these indigenous and rural remote fishers. They're largely indigenous and Métis indigenous people, and there's an opportunity there for them to work collectively to manage their own food processing and marketing, and that's back to this local food provision kind of idea. So I think there's a lot of opportunity that way. I'm hopeful, I'm cautiously optimistic, as they say, that this might lead to something. Also, I guess the other thing, you know, just in the credit union space, I think the sector has long been kind of pulling apart a little bit, kind of doing their own thing. And I think what this crisis has shown is that sometimes they need to pull together. and I'm hopeful that there'll be a little bit of a thinking about that, how they can collectively work more on the same, you know, song sheet. And so I'm kind of hopeful there as well, a little bit anyway. We'll see. But I'm happy for any thoughts you have on response to what I just said.
I think I love the idea of the shared printing. That makes eminent sense for a co-op. Factor out the thing that is common to everybody. Factor out the piece that is not, about any kind of competition, and use that to support everybody, right? For sure. In terms of resource management by Indigenous communities, we have an excellent example of that in British Columbia with River Select, which is a cooperative of Indigenous fishing organizations. And they are changing the way the inland fishery is being managed. And I'm sure they're impacted by this crisis, but there's some good opportunities there, right,
Yeah.
for that community. And as for credit unions, I think now's the time to really lean into the value side, lean into the 7 principles, and to lean into the bits that distinguish us from the chartered banks that make us different, and to view these kinds of organizations as a pool of capital that is there in community to serve that community of interest. And this is what makes us different, and this is really what we should be really holding up as our differentiator.
So now this is at risk of becoming more of a conversation, which is good.
Okay.
I have one more thought to share with you, and
Sure.
I'd like your response to it.
Okay.
I'm currently designing our course for our students in the policy school, and one thing that just occurred to me as we were speaking, particularly with your idea of the indivisible reserve, which has been in my head for a while too, is this an opportunity also for people who are interested in being policymakers or who are already policymakers to widen their toolkit, like add another tool to their toolkit here, and recognize that there's an opportunity here. And so I think that's kind of interesting too. And part of my question around, are we getting, it's the marketing question. I kind of wish there was more attention to the good things that are being done, because then it enters into the policy mindset, and then they're suddenly aware that there's this other thing out there. So I don't know if you have any response to that, but that to me is one of the things that I'm always, it's my kind of thinking of as my niche. How can I help policymakers increase their awareness of the cooperative sector so that they at least don't harm the sector, and ideally do some good as well?
I think I don't think we in the sector do enough to sort of celebrate our successes and to sort of communicate those kinds of things. And I think part of that is the mindset of the cooperative, right? I mean, we're not about flash, we're not about sexy, we're about getting the job done, and being practical and prudent. These are not things that sort of are widely attractive to for communication purposes. But I think we do need to do a much better job of sort of telling those stories. Marc-Andre, I don't think as much as I love this model and it needs to be applied in many more circumstances, it's not the right solution in all circumstances. It really does require a certain kind of commitment on the part of the people that are participating, and an alignment of values and a commitment to democratic principles, right? Not everybody is able to do that. Not everybody is able to kind of give up the autonomy, that little bit of autonomy necessary in order to make that happen. And so I think we'll always see fewer co-ops, and we'll see other forms of business. But the returns from co-ops are disproportionately large, right, in terms of their social impact and economic impact. And so I think co-ops are not the solution in every circumstance, but they need to be considered in every circumstance, in absolutely every circumstance, along with everything else. What is the appropriate incorporated mechanism in order to deliver on this result? Is it a society? Is it a company or a corporation? Is it a co-op? And too often that last question gets dropped off because people don't understand that model. And I think it's true for policymakers. It's also true for post-secondary educational institutions, too many of which do not have any co-op curriculum at all in their business schools. And us in the sector, I think we need to do generally a better job of marketing those ideas to our partners in government and education and elsewhere to ensure that they understand that this is a viable model that is the absolute correct solution in many circumstances.
Yeah, that's a really, really important point. In fact, that's one of the core themes of my course is to not say that the co-op model is the solution to all problems, but that you should at least put it in your consideration set. And that's all too often not what happens. It does not happen, basically. And so I think that's a good way to, at least from my perspective, to kind of wrap up, especially the not sexy part. I kind of, that fits very well with me, if you consider my attire.
I think we're all there now. We're all there. We're all there.
We're all not sexy, yes. Elvy, thank you so much for this really fun conversation. I hope other people enjoyed it as much as I have. Thank you.
I enjoyed it very much. Thanks, Marc-Andre.